All right, I do quickly want to talk about the other big game from the weekend outside of the Iron Bowl. I am, of course, talking about Ohio State, Michigan, the game for the millionth year in a row. It was hyped. We had Fox Sports on site. We had scarlet and gray, maize and blue in the background. We're excited. We're ready to go. Is this the year Michigan finally delivers? And for about the millionth year in a row, Michigan did not. Final score 56-27. And I do think what's interesting to me is a few different narratives, right? We all know that Jim Harbaugh has now fallen to 0-5 against his primary rival. We now know that Ohio State has won 14 out of the last 15 of these games. And I do think, look, for Ohio State, the narrative going forward is pretty simple. You advance to the Big Ten championship game. You move on to Wisconsin. You win that game. You're probably the number one seed in the college football playoff. Even if you lose, you're still going to make the college football playoff. It's just a matter of what seed you are. For Michigan, though, I think it's much more complicated, and there's so many layers to this story. Jim Harbaugh, of course, being the primary one. But before we even get into Jim Harbaugh, before we even get into where he stands with the Michigan fan base, where he stands nationally, what Michigan should do going forward, I kind of want to talk about the small picture which leads to the big picture. And the small picture was this, is that I think what's most frustrating for Michigan fans is not that they're losing these games. It's how it's happening. It is happening in a way in which Michigan, I think they're simply not as talented, which is what kind of made this game interesting coming in, because for the first time in a long time, I think Michigan fans kind of resigned themselves to the fact of like, you know what, Ohio State's 11-0. They have potentially 3 guys that are going to go to the Heisman Trophy ceremony in New York. Justin Fields at quarterback, J.K. Dobbins at running back, Chase Young at defensive end, and maybe this just isn't the year. Maybe this is the year we go 9-3, we go to a nice bowl game, and we start to build forward. We've obviously had a ton of success towards the back half of the schedule, and you just got to move forward as if, you know what, you're probably not going to beat your rival this year. Then you get into the game, and what happens? Michigan goes up 6-0, drive the length of the field, score a touchdown. Ohio State comes back, they take the lead. Michigan cuts it to 14-13 about midway through the second quarter, and I think every Michigan fan sitting there saying, you know what? We're not that bad. Maybe we can compete with these guys. Maybe we are further along than we thought. Maybe we can actually take these guys down. And then what happens? The most Michigan thing under Jim Harbaugh happened, which happens in every big game, which is that Michigan just completely shot themselves in the foot. If you watch the game, you know what I'm talking about. But as I said, the score was 14-13 early in the second quarter. Ohio State actually goes up 21-13, but there's a catch, and there's always a catch. And that catch is this. Michigan's offense was moving the ball. They drive the length of the field. Looks like they're going to go in, make the score 21-20. And what do? Shea Patterson fumbles in the red zone. It's recovered by Ohio State. Okay, no big deal. We can bounce back from this. Then what happens? Ohio State runs a couple plays. They end up in 3rd and 4. You think, okay, we finally got them off the field. We're going to get the ball back. What happens? Michigan goes off sides. Ohio State gets an automatic first down. 2 plays later, they score a touchdown to go up 28-13. And at that point, the game is basically over. It wasn't really over until about mid to late third quarter, but it was unofficially over at that point. And so to me, that is where a Michigan fan is frustrated on a Sunday morning. It's not that you lost to Ohio State in a year that potentially Ohio State people are saying this might be the best team in program history. It's not that you lost that game. It's how you lost it. You were again right there. You were again right in the mix. You were driving to make it 21-20, potentially 21-21 if you go for 2. And what happens? You fumble the ball. Okay, it happens sometimes. Then what happens? You get a stop on defense and you get a penalty, which gives Ohio State another set of downs. And that is the frustrating thing about Michigan and about Harbaugh, specifically in these big games, is they shoot themselves in the foot. They beat themselves. There are times where they really do have nobody to blame but themselves. And so I do get the frustration from a Michigan fan, even though this was a year where you didn't necessarily expect to beat Ohio State. What's interesting to me, however, what happens for Michigan for here? Because I do think Michigan is in one of those very unique scenarios. We see it every once in a while in college football where Michigan kind of has to decide, like, look, are we content with just being the second best team in the Big Ten and not beating our rival? Or do we really want to try to take this thing to another level? Because every time this happens in college football, there's always that kind of interesting dynamic, right? And we've seen it through the years at many different places. Tennessee at one point was really, really, really good. For people who don't remember, in the late 90s, mid-2000s, late 2000s, they were really good. But they got tired of losing to Florida. They got tired of losing to Georgia. They move on from Phil Fulmer. They really struggle. Same with Texas with Mac Brown. On the flip side, Georgia decided that Mark Richt wasn't good enough, and Kirby Smart probably was a step up since he's gotten there. And so why do I bring this up? It's because the Jim Harbaugh camps are now very divided. And it's one of those weird scenarios where I actually see both sides. And to be clear, just to be abundantly clear, I'm not saying that I think Jim Harbaugh is going to get fired. He is not going to be fired. He is going to be there, frankly, probably as long as he wants. He's a revered former player. They're winning at an insanely high level. But I do think what's very interesting is there are two kind of definitive camps, and I actually kind of see both sides, right? Like part of my job, what I do, there are times where I have to take a definitive stance. I'm on this side or I'm on that side. And with Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, I actually kind of see both sides. So if you look at it from kind of the negative perspective, the negative perspective is, of course, that he is 0-5 to his biggest rival. And when you put it in the context of everything else that he's done, he could potentially have a fourth 10-win season in 5 years. You say, is it really that bad? And part of me wants to say no, but part of me also understands the argument, and it's more from the national media and from a small minority in the Michigan fan base, is that I think that part of the fan base is saying, look, we're paying him like $9 million a year. And not only are we paying him $9 million a year, we're paying him to get us Big Ten championships, to wins over Ohio State, and into the college football playoff. This guy was not hired to go 10-2. This guy was hired to bring us to the highest levels of college football, to beat our rival, to win Big Ten championships, and to make the college football playoff. We don't expect to get there every year, but this is year 5 now, and we are not, I don't want to say not even close, but we're not where we thought we would be. And so I understand that faction of the fan base. I understand that faction of the media. I had my buddy Barrett Salih from CBS Sports kind of said something to the effect of, how many head coaches could lose to their rivals 5 straight times and live to tell about it and not get fired? See, that part I think is a little bit preposterous, but I think that speaks for the portion of fans that say, look, this guy is being paid $9 million a year. And it's not to beat Indiana, and it's not to beat Northwestern, and it's not to beat Rutgers, and it's not even to beat Michigan State or Wisconsin or Nebraska or some of the traditionally better teams in the Big Ten. He's getting paid $9 million a year to beat other $9 million a year coaches, which is Dabo Swinney, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer when he was there, Ryan Day now, and the guy's not doing it. And so I totally get that portion of the fan base. But I will also say, I get the other side too. And this is more where I lean, is that, call me crazy, but I'm old enough to remember 6 years ago when Michigan had Brady Hoke and Michigan was losing to Minnesota and they lost to Utah in a year where Utah was not even, I don't even think they were in a power conference at that point, and they were losing all these games that they shouldn't, and they're getting smoked by Michigan, they're getting smoked by Ohio State. And so, like, the one thing I will say about Jim Harbaugh, and I will defend Jim Harbaugh on, is he has been pretty freaking successful. I mean, if they go to a bowl game and they win a bowl game, and this is always my argument, right? If they go to they're 9-3 right now. If they go to a bowl game and win a bowl game this year, they're going to finish 10-3. That will be the 4th time in 5 years that Jim Harbaugh finishes with 10 wins or more during his time at Michigan. 4 seasons out of 5, he's going to get 10 wins. And I know you're not beating Ohio State, and I know that's frustrating. But I'll say this. There's probably about 120 programs in college football out of the 130 that would trade their success for Jim Harbaugh's success over the last 5 years. There's probably 120 plus programs that would take 4 10-win seasons out of the last 5 like Michigan has had. And so that is the part that frustrates me when we talk about, you can't beat Ohio State, you got to fire Harbaugh. I mean, come on, man. 4 10-win seasons in 5 years? Let's be real here. And not only that, he is, to his credit, taking care of the teams that he's supposed to. Ironically, he's kind of the opposite of Gus Malzahn, right? Gus Malzahn has this actually pretty incredible success against Nick Saban. He's beaten Nick Saban 3 times in 7 years. Every other SEC coach currently in the SEC has beaten Nick Saban once. That was Ed Orgeron a few weeks ago. But Gus Malzahn also has these weird weekends where he loses to bad teams. And Jim Harbaugh, to his credit, is kind of the exact opposite. Jim Harbaugh is the guy that takes care of business against everybody he's supposed to, and he just can't get over Ohio State. And so I also understand that portion of things, because if you think about it realistically, Michigan has been the second best program in the Big Ten under Jim Harbaugh. They were not that before he got there. They weren't even the second. They were the second best team in their own state. Before Jim Harbaugh got there, as I said, they were losing to Utah. They were losing to Minnesota. They were losing to Nebraska. They were losing to Michigan State. Now, guess what? He's got a winning record against Penn State. He's got a winning record against Michigan or against Michigan State. They are the second best program in the Big Ten, and I don't think we should brush that off. So I get the side that says you got to win more. You got to beat your rival. We're paying you $9 million a year. But I also get the side that says we're about to potentially win 10 games for the 4th time in 5 years. Even in Harbaugh's quote-unquote down year, we won 8 games, which is something that a lot of programs can't say. And I understand that side of things too. And I think what's going to be interesting is what happens going forward. I also think what's interesting is kind of this perspective. What is Michigan supposed to be? And this is the conversation that I actually haven't heard anybody talking about, right? Like I was thinking about this after the game. Is it possible that we are just at a point where Michigan is kind of what they are supposed to be in college football? And I know this sounds like a weird, like, AT, what are you talking about? But here's what I'm saying, is there are certain programs that when everything is in line, they should be competing for national championships. Ohio State, USC, Florida, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, maybe Florida State. Then there's that next tier. And I don't know where Michigan fits in, but I'll tell you this. I'm going to tell you a stat that I think is going to kind of blow people's minds when I tell you this. Michigan last won a national championship in 1997. That was a split national championship with Nebraska. Why do I bring that up? It's because prior to that, Michigan had not won a national championship since, are you ready for this? 1948. 1948. So in the last 71 years, Michigan has one split national championship. Just for comparison, BYU has a national championship during that time frame. Georgia Tech has a split national championship during that time frame. Washington has a split national championship during that time frame. Miami has won 5 national championships in the time that Michigan has won a half a national championship. And so I only bring that up because I'm starting to wonder this. I'm not making excuses for Harbaugh. And I do understand the portion of college football fans that are like, dude, he's got to be better. We're paying him $9 million a year. But I'm also wondering, is 10-2 about what Michigan is as a football program when everything's going right? Because I do think it's one of those deals where I just look at it and I say, look, they're in a cold northern state. Population is declining while you have places like Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee and California and all these warm weather states, the population is increasing by the day. The population is decreasing in Michigan, and that's not a knock on Michigan. It's just a reality. Cold weather place. And the other thing, too, is Ohio State is playing at a historic level. And so I get the frustration. But what I would also say is, isn't this about where Michigan should be? Shouldn't they be about 11-1, 10-2? And if Ohio State happens to be down, maybe this is the year that you knock them off and you win the national championship, or you at least win the Big Ten championship and make the playoff. Again, I'm not saying that Michigan fans have to resign themselves to the next 50 years of never beating Ohio State. But when Ohio State is this good, isn't this about where you should be? And I know it's not what Michigan fans want to hear, but I think it's the reality. I think the reality is 10-2 is about as good as it's going to get, and every once in a while, maybe the stars will align, and maybe you'll compete for a national championship. Maybe you'll get past Ohio State. And so that was a thought that I had. As I said, I'm not implying that Michigan is going to fire Jim Harbaugh. I'm not even implying that they should fire Jim Harbaugh. I just find this whole scenario so fascinating because I do think, I think Jim Harbaugh's fine. He's going to be there at least another 2 or 3 years if he wants to be before there's real heat, as long as he keeps beating the teams he's supposed to. As long as he beats the teams he's supposed to, my understanding is in Ann Arbor, nobody is going to give him a hard time. But I also think at some point, Michigan fans are going to have to resign to themselves to the fact that, like, it ain't 1942 anymore. It ain't 1927 anymore. It's 2019. And maybe 10-2 is about what you should expect. Maybe every once in a while you'll break through and win the playoff, but maybe you have to accept that this is kind of where you are as a program. And to take it a step further, on the flip side, I'm just saying, maybe, just maybe, the alternative would be worse without Jim Harbaugh. I'll be fascinated to see. Listen, like I said, for the millionth time, and then I'll wrap. He isn't going anywhere. He isn't getting fired, nothing like that. But I do think in the next 2 or 3 years, if he can't get past Ohio State, Michigan is going to reach a crossroads the way that LSU had a crossroads with Les Miles, the way that Georgia had a crossroads with Mark Richt, the way that Tennessee had a crossroads with Phil Fulmer. Are we okay being good but not great? But for right now, Jim Harbaugh is fine. But I also do wonder, is this the reality that Michigan has to face? Do they have to maybe accept that this is their lot in life, that maybe 10-2 is about as good as it's going to get?